A delivery driver isn't a husband, Malcolm. He's a placeholder until I found someone actually going somewhere. That was a sentence my wife of 11 years said to me across our kitchen island, in the same even tone she used to order coffee, 3 weeks before she filed for divorce, and 2 days before I found out she'd already picked out an apartment with a man she'd been seeing for the better part of a year. I'm Malcolm Reeves. I was 38 years old, and I drove a delivery route for a regional logistics carrier out of Charlotte. 12-hour shifts, 5 days a week, sometimes 6 when the holiday surge hit. I didn't argue with her that night. I didn't raise my voice. I picked up my coffee, finished it standing at the counter, and asked her one question. Have you already signed a lease? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I already knew, because I've been quietly watching the signs pile up for 4 months. Signs she never once imagined a placeholder would notice, let alone document. What Vanessa didn't know that night, and wouldn't know for another 14 months, was that the man she just called a placeholder had spent 3 years mapping every inefficiency in an industry worth $400 billion a year, and had already started building a company that would eventually own the one that signed her paycheck. Stick with me, because the sentence that ended our marriage wasn't the end of the story. It was the exact moment I stopped hiding what I'd been building, and started building it for real. I met Vanessa Okafor at a mutual friend's cookout the summer I turned 27, back when I was 3 years into driving routes for Palisade Regional Freight, and she was finishing her MBA and already talking, with a kind of confident specificity that impressed everyone in the room, about the corporate strategy career she intended to build. She liked, in those early years, that I was steady. The word she used constantly, steady, like it was a compliment rather than the quiet insult it would eventually become. I showed up when I said I would. I didn't disappear into ambition, the way some of her business school classmates did, chasing promotions that ate their marriages alive. She used to say she needed someone steady to build a life around. We married when I was 29. For the first several years, things were genuinely good, not perfect, but honest, the kind of partnership where both people are still choosing each other actively rather than out of habit. Vanessa's career accelerated fast. She moved from a junior strategy analyst role into procurement leadership at a mid-sized industrial distribution company called Faro Cross Supply Chain Group, and within 6 years, she was running their entire Western Logistics division. I was proud of her. I told her so regularly, and I meant it every time. But somewhere in those years of her rapid ascent, the language she used to describe me started shifting in small, almost imperceptible increments. At her company dinners, when someone asked what I did, she stopped saying, "He drives for Palisade," and started saying with practiced vagueness, "He's in transportation logistics," a phrase technically true and deliberately misleading, designed to let people assume whatever level of seniority they want without her having to correct them. She stopped inviting me to her firm's annual gala after the second year, citing scheduling conflicts that never quite held up under scrutiny. She started taking calls in the guest room with the door shut, calls that ran long, calls she never fully explained afterward. I noticed all of it. I told myself, the way people often do when they're not ready to face what they're seeing, that she was under real pressure in a competitive industry, and that this distance was a phase that would eventually pass once she settled into her role. What I didn't tell myself, because I wasn't ready to yet, was that somewhere in those years, I had also started quietly building something of my own, not out of ambition exactly, but out of a specific, growing frustration with everything I watched go wrong every single day from behind the wheel of a delivery truck. 11 years of driving routes teaches you things nobody in a corporate office ever bothers to learn. I watched dispatch systems send drivers on routes that wasted 40 minutes a day in avoidable backtracking. I watched warehouses stage pallets in configurations that added an average of 6 minutes to every loading sequence. 6 minutes multiplied across 200 trucks a day, multiplied across 300 working days a year. I watched companies pay premium rush fees for emergency deliveries that only became emergencies because nobody had bothered to build a smarter baseline schedule in the first place. I started keeping a small notebook in my cab door, not complaints, solutions. Specific, costed, testable solutions to problems I watched cost my employer real money every single week. Problems nobody with a corner office had ever spent enough time on a loading dock to actually see. Vanessa never asked what was in that notebook. Not once. In 3 years of it slowly filling up. The night I found out about Preston Cade wasn't dramatic, at least not at first. I'd finished a route 2 hours early after a warehouse closure pushed several of my stops to the following morning, and I came home planning to surprise her with dinner, hoping, in the quiet, stubborn way you hope when a marriage is fraying, but you haven't admitted it's actually torn, that an ordinary evening together might remind us both why we'd started in the first place. I heard her voice from the home office before I'd even set my keys down, not on speakerphone, talking directly to someone in the room with her. Preston Cade's voice answered. I recognized it later from photos, but that night it was just a man's voice, warm and confident in a way that made something in my chest go very still. He was telling her about a townhouse near the River District he was closing on. He mentioned, casually, a vice president title at his private equity firm that would be opening up in the spring, one he thought she'd be perfect for. She laughed at something, he said, an easy, unguarded laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in longer than I wanted to admit. I didn't walk in. I went back out to my truck and sat in the driveway for the better part of an hour. I wasn't as shocked as I expected to be. That absence of shock told me something important, that some part of me had already understood long before that night exactly where things were heading. I spent the following 4 months doing what 11 years behind the wheel had trained me to do best, paying close, patient attention to details other people assumed nobody was tracking. Credit card statements with charges from restaurants I'd never been taken to. A gym membership at a facility 20 minutes from her office that she'd never mentioned joining. A folder I found, open on the shared laptop one evening while she was in the shower, from a family law attorney named Priscilla Van, containing a draft asset division worksheet that listed our joint accounts, our house, and a spousal support calculation based entirely on my documented income as a delivery driver against her division director's salary. She wasn't just planning to leave. She was building a legal case designed around the assumption that a driver's income made him the disposable half of the marriage. I drove to my sister Dominique's place that night and told her everything. Dominique had passed the bar 6 years earlier and now practiced family law out of a small firm in South End. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she pulled out a legal pad and started writing. She's going to use your income bracket to argue you have limited earning capacity and should accept a reduced settlement, Dominique said. We need documentation of every asset, every account. And, Malcolm, does she know about the notebook? The route efficiency work. She's never asked. Good, Dominique said. Then it's not marital intellectual property she can claim a stake in. Keep it that way. 3 weeks later, I came home to find 2 suitcases by the front door and Vanessa seated at the kitchen island in the charcoal blazer she wore exclusively when she needed to project total control of her room. Priscilla Van sat beside her with a folder already open. Preston Cade stood near the bay window with the relaxed, proprietary posture of a man who believed the hardest part of the evening was already behind him. I filed, Vanessa said. I need you out of the house by the end of the week. I looked at the suitcases. I looked at Preston. I looked back at her. How long have you been planning this? Long enough to know exactly what I want. And it isn't watching you drive the same route for the rest of your life, while I wonder what else I could have built. Preston shifted near the window. There's no need for this to get ugly, man. Just sign, and we can all move forward like adults. I turned and held his gaze for a long moment before turning back to Vanessa. A delivery driver isn't a husband, I repeated quietly, the sentence she'd handed me across the same counter 3 weeks earlier. He's a placeholder until I found someone actually going somewhere. That's what you told me. Something flickered across her face. Not quite regret, not yet, but the specific discomfort of hearing your own cruelty played back to you in someone else's steady voice. I'll sign the divorce, I said. I won't sign a settlement built on the assumption that what I do for a living makes me worth less as a person. Priscilla Van leaned in and whispered something. Vanessa's jaw tightened. I reached into my jacket and set a folder on the counter. Bank records, the townhouse closing documents Preston had described to her before he'd actually secured financing for them. A printout of a spousal support statute that capped calculations on documented income, not projected potential. I'm not fighting for the house, I said. Keep it. I'm not fighting for the furniture. Keep that too. I want a fair, documented settlement based on actual assets, not a narrative about who's going somewhere and who isn't. Vanessa stared at the folder for a long moment. Then, quietly, she nodded to her attorney. The papers were adjusted. She signed. I signed. I picked up my 2 suitcases and walked to the door and stopped with my hand on the frame and turned back once. You didn't leave because I wasn't going anywhere, Vanessa, I said. You left because you didn't have the patience to wait and see where I was actually headed. She didn't answer. I walked out into a cold Charlotte evening, carrying everything I owned in 2 bags, and somewhere beneath the exhaustion and particular hollow ache of watching an 11-year marriage end across a kitchen island, something in me settled into a quiet, unshakable resolve. I drove straight to Dominique's apartment. I sat at her kitchen table. I pulled the notebook out of my jacket pocket, the one I'd carried in my truck door for 3 years. It was time to stop writing solutions down and start building them. The apartment I rented over the following weeks was a 1-bedroom above a laundromat 6 blocks from the Palisade Depot, small enough that the dryers running below sent a faint hum to the floor at all hours. I paid week to week for the first month because I genuinely didn't know what the second month would look like. My daughter, Simone, 12 years old, split her time between her mother's place and mine, and the first weekend she visited, she looked around the sparse apartment for a long moment before asking if I had Wi-Fi. I told her not yet. She nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable answer, pulled out her tablet's offline games, and asked if I wanted to watch a movie she'd already downloaded. She has always handled change better than either of her parents. I kept driving my route every morning. Same truck, same 12-hour shifts, same depot I'd reported to for 11 years. The only thing that changed was that I stopped leaving the notebook in the truck door overnight. I brought it home. I spent evenings turning 3 years of scattered observations into an actual operating model, a route optimization framework built around real dock-to-dock timing data I'd personally logged, a warehouse staging protocol that could cut average loading delays by nearly a third, a dispatch scheduling system that eliminated the padded emergency. Rush fees carriers routinely overcharge clients for jobs that were never actual emergencies to begin with. I called Theo Kessler. Theo had worked dispatch at the Palisade Depot for 9 years, the kind of quiet, exacting professional who understood the logic of a supply chain the way I understood the logic of a route. I'm starting a company. I told him, the pay is going to be rough for a while. What's the work? Everything we've been doing for other people, except we do it for ourselves and we do it the right way. He didn't hesitate. Our first contract came to a small furniture retailer whose regional distributor had missed 4 consecutive delivery windows without explanation. The owner, a woman named Adora Whitfield, had heard my name through a Palisade dispatcher I'd once helped diagnose a recurring cold chain failure that 3 previous consultants had misdiagnosed entirely. She didn't have a large budget, but she had real, urgent need, and she was willing to bet on an improving company that showed up exactly when it promised to. We showed up every single time. Theo and I ran the operation ourselves those first months, mapping routes before sunrise, personally driving the first deliveries, submitting a detailed performance report after every shipment cycle showing exactly what had improved and what we flagged for the following week. Within 4 months, Adora had referred us to 2 other small businesses without us ever asking. When a scheduling conflict threatened to blow a delivery deadline during a client's biggest sales weekend of the year, I drove until nearly midnight to make sure it landed on time, because I wasn't going to let a company that bet on us pay the price for a gap in our own system. By month 6, Reeves Logistics Solutions had 3 contracts, and Theo and I still weren't matching what we'd made driving for Palisade. But we were building something real, not something that merely looked successful from the outside while quietly collapsing underneath, the way so many ventures do. Every route we optimized, every report we filed, every deadline we hit exactly as promised, that was a foundation. Quiet, unglamorous, the kind of foundation that holds. By month 9, a regional operations director who'd heard about us through 2 separate referrals called Theo directly, asking if he could scale to handle a distribution network across 4 counties. We said yes, and then spent 3 sleepless weeks figuring out how to actually deliver on that yes. I hired 2 additional dispatchers, then 3 drivers, then a 4th. I turned my 3-year-old notebook into a formalized training protocol. Every seasonal risk, Every common scheduling failure, every vendor red flag I'd cataloged across 11 years behind the wheel. So the quality of our work didn't depend on whether I personally showed up to every job site. That's the part nobody puts in a business school case study. The most valuable thing you can build isn't a product. It's a system that carries your standards forward even when you're not the one holding it up. Meanwhile, word of Vanessa's life after the divorce reached me the way these things always do, sideways, through people who cared enough to let me know without quite saying it directly. My mother-in-law, Charlene, had never fully agreed with how Vanessa handled the end of our marriage, and she had a way of updating me on things without putting either of us in an uncomfortable position. She called one Saturday while Simone was doing homework at my kitchen table. She told me Vanessa had moved out of the townhouse and was staying with her for a while. I asked if Simone needed anything. Charlene said Simone was fine, then added, quietly, "I never agreed with how she handled things, Malcolm. I told her who you actually were. She had to find that out for herself, apparently." I thanked her. I meant it. The fuller picture came together over the following months. The vice president position Preston had promised Vanessa never materialized. The fund's actual partners had never approved the head count he described, and by the time she pressed him on it, he'd started deflecting with a practiced vagueness she recognized, with a sick jolt, as the exact same tone she'd once used to describe my job to strangers. The townhouse he described as already secured turned out to be contingent on a financing deal that fell through twice before collapsing entirely. When his firm's investors began asking pointed questions about a fund allocation Preston had structured with numbers that didn't reconcile, he stopped answering Vanessa's calls first, then stopped answering anyone's. He didn't disappear in one dramatic moment. He simply faded, shorter texts, unreturned calls, a slow erosion until the morning Vanessa found the townhouse locks changed and her name absent from any lease that had ever actually been filed. She co-signed 2 documents for him along the way, described as routine paperwork to facilitate closing timelines. They turned out to be personal guarantees on private financing his firm's investors were now pursuing through civil litigation. Her name appeared in coverage of the case within weeks. Her clients at Faro Cross began quietly distancing themselves from the association. 14 months after the night she told me a delivery driver wasn't a husband, Vanessa Okafor was living in her mother's guest room, scrolling job listings, trying to rebuild a career that had cracked considerably faster than the marriage she'd walked away from. She found a posting from a company called Reeves Logistics Solutions, regional director of client strategy, strong growth trajectory, expanding into institutional supply chain contracts across the Carolinas. The listing used initials for the founder's contact information. There was no headshot on the company website, a deliberate choice I'd made because I wanted the work to speak for the company, not my own history. She had the experience. She needed stability. She applied. Theo brought the application folder to my desk and set it down without a word. I opened it. Vanessa's name, her work history, Charlene's Bridgeport address listed as her current residence. I sat with it for a long moment. "I can pull this before it goes further," Theo said quietly. "Nobody would ever have to know. Does she qualify to interview on her own merit?" "On paper, yes. Genuinely strong candidate. Then give her the exact same process as everyone else." She passed the first 2 rounds cleanly. Her phone screening was sharp. She spoke intelligently about positioning a growing logistics company to institutional clients, understood the distinction between a transactional vendor relationship and a genuine strategic partnership, and came across, according to the recruiter's notes, as one of the stronger candidates in the entire pool. In round 2, she came in for a panel interview and a facility walkthrough with Theo. He guided her through the dispatch floor, the route planning room, the loading bay. At one point, they stopped in front of a frame display mounted outside my office, my old Palisade. Delivery uniform, folded neatly behind glass, a small brass plate fixed beneath it. "What's that for?" she asked. "The founder wore that every day for 11 years before he built this company," Theo said. "He keeps it there so he never loses sight of where all of this actually came from." Something shifted across her expression. Not recognition yet, more discomfort without a name. She moved on, but her questions changed after that. Why was there no photo of the founder anywhere? how the company name had been chosen. Near the dispatch board, Theo pointed to a line printed at the top of every route sheet and every client contract we sent out. Where you start doesn't set your ceiling. She read it twice. That's a strong line, she said, almost to herself. Later, when Theo mentioned the founder had started as a delivery driver, she gave the answer that would end up in her formal evaluation that evening. That's a compelling origin story, genuinely. But institutional clients respond first to polish and track record. The personal narrative works better as a secondary detail, not the headline. Theo asked her directly whether someone who'd spent a decade driving delivery routes could realistically build something that served institutional clients at this level. I think people tend to be most effective operating within their existing strengths, she said. He wrote it down exactly as she'd said it and submitted it with his evaluation. She advanced to the final round anyway. Her qualifications were simply too strong to dismiss over one comment, and Theo, to his credit, never once let his personal read of her color the formal evaluation. The morning of the final interview, I arrived before anyone else. I made coffee. I read through her complete application one more time, not looking for a reason to say no, but making sure I could walk into that conference room as a founder evaluating a candidate, not as a former husband settling a score. Those needed to be two different men that morning, and I needed absolute clarity on which one I was. Dominique met me at the office at 8:30. You don't have to sit in on this one, she said. I'm the one making the final call. That makes it my room. She gave me the look she's given me since we were kids, the one that says she thinks I haven't fully reasoned something through, but she's going to let me find out for myself because I'm usually right in the end. Just remember, she said before she turned to go, you're doing this for the right reasons. Don't let the room turn you into someone you're not. I sat with that for a minute. Then I walked to the conference room through the back hallway. Vanessa was already seated when I opened the door. Dark blazer, straight posture, hands folded on the table. The same composed armor she'd worn the night. She handed her attorney a folder and told me to sign. She looked prepared. The way someone looks when they've rehearsed every question they can imagine and have a polished answer waiting for each one. She looked up when I entered. I watched recognition move across her face in distinct, unmistakable stages. First confusion, the particular disorientation of something familiar appearing somewhere it has no business being. Then her eyes tracking from me to the name placard on the table in front of my seat. M. Reeves, founder and chairman. The color left her face slowly, the way water pulls back before it breaks. You work here, she said. I built this, I said, sitting down, placing her file on the table between us. Since the night you put my suitcases by the front door. The room went completely still. She looked at the framed uniform visible through the glass wall behind me. I watched her put the pieces together. The missing headshot, the motto above the dispatch board, my sister's name on the company's legal filings. She'd been standing inside the answer for 2 full interview rounds and hadn't let herself believe it. You let me go through this whole process, she said, her voice steady but something thin running beneath it. You let me sit in front of your staff and interview for a job at your company. You applied, I said. I didn't reach out. You found the listing. You submitted your materials. And you moved through every stage the same way every other candidate does. My team evaluated your qualifications. Nothing else. Is this some kind of point you're trying to make? It's a final round interview, I said. That's all it's ever been. She looked down at her hands, then back up, and composure had returned, but it was sitting differently on her now. Less like armor, more like something she was holding carefully so it wouldn't slip. Are you going to offer me the position? She asked. I opened Theo's evaluation and turned it to face her. I think people tend to be most effective operating within their existing strengths. She read her own words back. She recognized them instantly. I was talking about brand positioning, she said carefully, about leading with credentials before leaning on a personal story. Theo has been with me since before this company had a second employee, I said. He was there loading trucks at midnight with borrowed tools, and no guarantee we'd land a second contract. He built the operations model that got us to 41 active client accounts. And when you told him a person should stay within their existing strengths, you were sitting in a building a delivery driver built from nothing. After the full tour, after seeing exactly where this company came from, you still hadn't made the connection. She didn't answer. I let the silence hold. Vanessa, I said finally, folding my hands on the table. Why did you divorce me? She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. Malcolm, I'm not setting a trap, I said. I'm asking because the answer actually matters to what happens after this conversation. I watched her consider redirecting, pivoting back to professional framing, reminding me we were in a job interview, reclaiming control of the room the way she'd been skilled at doing for years. She didn't. I was embarrassed, she said finally, the words coming slower than anything else she'd said, like they'd been locked away and the key had just been handed back to her. Not of you, of what I thought it said about where I was in my own life, about the version of myself I was presenting to everyone around me. I wanted people to see me a certain way, and I couldn't figure out how to hold on to that image while also being honest about who you were and what you actually did every day. I told myself you weren't just a driver, and then I acted like you were nothing but one anyway. You knew the truth then, I said. You chose not to look at it. She didn't argue. I set 4 things on the table in front of her, one at a time. Her application, her evaluation scores from both prior rounds, earned, legitimate, unaltered, a copy of our signed divorce settlement, and a printed photograph from my phone, me in my old Palisade uniform standing outside a storage unit the morning Theo and I loaded it for our very first job. I looked exhausted in that photo. I also looked like a man who knew exactly what he was building. You don't get to respect the work now because you found out it turned into a company, I said. Either what I was doing had real value before any of this existed, or everything you're saying to me today is just a reaction to your own plans falling apart. Those are 2 very different things, and the difference matters to me. Her jaw tightened, then released. She nodded, not a quick nod, not a performance, but the kind that comes from someone finally setting down something heavy they've been carrying too long to lift. You're right, she said. What I said to you that night was wrong. How I treated you for years before that night was wrong. I didn't apply here because Preston fell apart. I genuinely didn't know this was your company. And I understand completely if you don't want me anywhere near it. She started to rise. Sit down, I said. She sat. I'm not offering you the client strategy position, I said. Not because of our history. Because you told my director of operations that people should stay within their existing strengths, and I can't have that mindset sitting across from clients on this company's behalf. It contradicts everything we're actually built to represent. She absorbed that without argument. There's a different offer, I said, sliding a page across the table. Field Operations Coordinator. 6-month probationary period. Reporting directly to Theo. No access to my calendar or my office. The first 2 weeks are spent working directly alongside our loading and dispatch crews at 2 active sites. Not observing, doing. Any disrespect toward field staff results in immediate termination, no appeal. She read it twice, carefully. You'd actually do this, she said, not quite a question. I'm doing it because your instincts are genuinely strong and this company could use them, I said. And because Simone called me last week and told me she wants to see her mother build something the way she watched me do it. I paused. She wasn't asking about us getting back together. She wasn't asking anything about what you and I should be to each other. She said she wants her mother to build something real. She's 13, and she said more clearly than I ever could have. Vanessa's eyes went bright. She held it. I'll take it, she said. She started on a Monday. I made sure I wasn't in the building that morning. That first day belonged entirely to her, without me hovering over it. Theo told me she arrived 7 minutes early, dressed practically, and said nothing when he handed her a clipboard and a route manifest. 3 weeks in, a warehouse conveyor jammed at 2 a.m. ahead of a major retail client's biggest shipment window of the quarter. Theo called in the overnight crew. He called Vanessa because she was listed as the site coordinator on record. She arrived in under 20 minutes and worked alongside 6 other people until the line was cleared and every pallet made the truck before the 6 a.m. cutoff. She didn't leave until the shift change, watching the loaded trucks pull out on schedule before she went home to get ready for her regular hours. Theo told me she didn't say much when the work was finished. She just gathered her things and left. He mentioned it the way he mentions most things. Briefly, without commentary. She stayed, he said. That was enough. 5 months in, a new hire asked about the framed uniform outside my office. The same question dozens of new employees had asked before her. Vanessa answered before Theo could. That's what this company was actually built from, she said. The founder keeps it there so nobody ever forgets everything here starts at ground level. Literally. She glanced at the brass plate beneath it. And that line underneath, that's not a slogan. That's a promise he made himself back when nobody was watching and nobody believed he'd keep it. Theo told me about it the following week, the same quiet way he tells me everything that actually matters. I thought about it for a long time. On the day we signed our largest contract to date, a regional distribution agreement spanning 6 counties, the single biggest deal in the company's history. I rented a modest banquet hall in Bridgeport and invited every person who had ever worked for Reeves Logistics Solutions. I kept my remarks short. I've never believed long speeches say more than the work itself already says. But I did share one thing I've been carrying for a long time. I said that when I started this company, I had 2 suitcases, a notebook full of solutions nobody had asked me for, and a 1-bedroom apartment with a laundromat hum running through the floor at night. I said I had a daughter who needed to see something true from her father, and I had 11 years of knowing exactly how supply chain actually works from the inside. Knowledge that can't be faked, can't be purchased, and turns out to be worth everything once you're finally willing to build with it instead of just enduring it. I asked everyone from the field crews to come stand at the front of the room. The drivers, the dispatchers, the overnight loading team, every person who answered call at 2 in the morning and stayed until the job was done, whether or not anyone would ever know their name for it. 31 people came forward. I shook every hand personally. Simone was in the back with Dominique. 13 years old, taller than I'd registered, the way kids get when life keeps moving and you're too focused on the work to notice it happening. After the formal part ended, she pushed through the crowd and wrapped her arms fully around me, the way she used to when she was small. Dad. Yeah. I'm not proud because you're the chairman, she said. I'm proud because nobody believed you would get here, and you built it anyway. I held on an extra second before letting go. Across the room, Vanessa stood near the far wall with a glass of water, watching, not angling for a moment, not trying to catch my eye, just present, appropriate, an employee at her employer's milestone event, making no claims to anything more than that. I gave her a single nod. She nodded back. That was enough. I didn't need her to acknowledge what I'd built. I didn't need Preston Cade in that room to see it. I didn't need the people who once looked at a delivery uniform and made up their minds about my worth to come back around and revise their assumptions. I never needed any of that. What I needed, the only thing I ever genuinely needed, was for my daughter to understand one true thing, something I wish someone had told me plainly before I spent years quietly measuring my own worth against other people's definitions of what a life well lived is supposed to look like. No honest work makes a person small. The driver who shows up before sunrise so a warehouse runs on schedule, the dispatcher who reroutes an entire fleet at 2 in the morning so a shipment doesn't miss its window, the person whose hands are callous from work nobody photographs and nobody puts in a highlight reel. That work is the reason everything built on top of it is even possible. Where you start was never your ceiling. And the most dangerous thing anyone can ever convince you of, anyone, no matter how close they are to you, is that it is. Thank you so much for staying with this story until the very end. If Malcolm's journey from a Charlotte delivery route to chairman of his own company moved you, let me know in the comments which moment hit you hardest. And if you want more stories about quiet resilience, patient rebuilding, and the people who got counted out and kept building anyway, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder today. What would you have done in Malcolm's position? Tell me below.